Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
You can tell a lot about where a company is going by looking at where it's been. ConocoPhillips, Alaska's oil and gas company.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service. It is the 19th of December, just days away from the winter solstice. You can almost taste it, and you know the daylight is coming back here. By the end of the weekend, we'll start to see some very minor, but some improvements. That'll be nice. ARH.NOAA.gov is the place to go for a statewide view of watches, warnings, and advisories, a look at radar, observations, satellite pictures, and a whole lot more from the National Weather Service for your community and village. The weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. NWS is on Twitter at NWS Alaska for the entire statewide message. NWS Anchorage, NWS Fairbanks, and NWS Juneau, of course. On Facebook under U.S. National Weather Service Alaska, an interesting post today on just how our perspective is on cold, at least in south central Alaska, and one of the coldest winter periods that we've seen back in 1917. You can read more about that there. And on YouTube, during the mid-afternoon, you can get a quick update of the statewide picture. It may sound very similar if you listen to the statewide message on public radio. You'll hear that, and it will accompany the surface charts that you're used to seeing here on Alaska Weather. That's from NWS Anchorage on our YouTube channel. And then following this broadcast right here, you'll see this broadcast on YouTube. If you search for AKWX TV, Alaska Weather, kind of in code there. That channel brought to you by this channel, Alaska Public. You'll find that entire broadcast again online as we go into the evening hours there following this broadcast. Tonight's hazardous weather really focusing on southeast right now. We've still got some very active weather there in places like Hyder. The snowfall rates could be approaching or may have already reached 1 inch an hour in some cases there. A winter storm warning will continue there until I believe 7 or 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Looks like that snowfall rates could reach anywhere from 9 to 14 inches of snow again. So that'll go until 6 o'clock in the morning as the focus for heavy snow making will still go down in the southern parts of southeast, especially near the higher terrain. And a little bit farther north now, including places like Petersburg, Wrangell, Cake, a winter storm warning continues for you, but only until midnight. However, snow totals there could reach upwards of 7 to 11 inches. And a lot of what you see here across the northern parts of southeast, including Juneau, places around Haines and Skagway, and farther around the bend toward Yakutat, a lot of those warnings and advisories, for that matter, will continue at least for a little bit longer into the evening, perhaps around 6 o'clock. You'll see a lot of these allowed to expire or they'll be canceled in the next few minutes or so. The snow should be winding down for you and transition into parts of British Columbia where they're anticipating periods of rain and snow as well. A little bit farther to the west, you can see around the Kuskokwim and lower Yukon valleys there. Winter weather advisories. It's not so much for the snow, but for the chance that there's going to be some freezing rain or drizzle there. It does look like there may be a brief opportunity during the daytime tomorrow, mainly between 9 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock at night, that there might be some trace accumulations with that. So anywhere from a trace to about 1/10 of an inch of kind of a glaze or freezing rain coating some surfaces there. That extends all the way from the YK Delta, all the way into the lower and mid-Yukon valleys and the upper Kuskokwim Valley, including places like McGrath and Hooper Bay, Grayling, and Galena. So keep an eye on that again. That is a winter weather advisory from 9 o'clock tomorrow until 9 p.m. Friday night. So hopefully not too many impacts from that, but just be ready for it in case it arrives. Looking out to the west, we can see our latest weather maker, a large area of low pressure here working its way in through the central and eastern Aleutians. A little bit farther west, another surge of moisture coming off the eastern continent of Asia there in the Sea of Japan. This large circulation here on the backside of it is bringing in quite a bit of cold air in places like Anadyr today. Well below the 20-degree mark, anywhere from 20 to about 30 below, I think, looking at their latest observations. Around Gamble, you can see you're caught in that northerly flow, and the ice is really starting to thicken up there and freeze over in places even a little bit further south of the Bering Strait and along the shores. And we'll take a look at that ice edge here in just a little bit. Here's a look at the satellite picture now across most of Alaska. You can see the latest focus is bringing that surge of moisture across southeast. Some breaks in the clouds from time to time today, and you can see how that's kind of backing itself down through southeast. That wave of low pressure will pass through tonight and early tomorrow morning, breaking apart the clouds, but setting you up for that next wave that's working into the Gulf as we head into the weekend. That's also bringing some warm air into southwest, and again, that opportunity for some freezing rain, though relatively light, does represent a small impact there to the lower Yukon Valley and the Kuskokwim Valley, and a lot of that cloud cover will make its way into the interior. There may be some pockets of snow across the central and northern parts of the interior, and again, looking at a wave of cold air dropping in on the back side of this, as you'll see there on the surface charts in just a little bit. So the overall weather pattern in the upper level supporting much colder flow certainly across the central and western parts of the Bering Sea, and then eventually toward the western Aleutians going into early parts of next week. Once again, the satellite loop shows that drier air for now trying to work its way in behind last night's snow across south central. And many places like Homer and Seward saw considerably more snow, even west parts of Anchorage compared to eastern sides of Anchorage, than what northern areas in the Mat-Su Valley, even Eagle River, just picking up maybe a half inch to a 1 inch of snow compared to western Anchorage at 6 inches, and I think it was around 10 to 11 inches in some places closer to Homer. So this is more of a western tip of the western parts of the Kenai Peninsula and Anchorage Bowl event, if you're keeping track of what happened in south central just yesterday. Today's weather map shows a low pressure system then just west of southeast. You can see that south and southeast flow working in over the cold air there as that warm air is wrung out across the southeastern parts of the archipelago. Some light rain there around the Alaska Peninsula and just west of Kodiak. And then there's our areas of snow, anywhere from the upper Kuskokwim Valley to the mid-Yukon Valley out to the western coast, and then low pressure south of the Aleutians at 981 millibars. Most of the interior was seeing at least some form of cloud cover today, areas of dense fog to occasional flurries and fog out around Kaktovik and the Arctic coast, as a trough of low pressure was forming just to the west of the west coast and right over the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. Heading into tonight, low pressure will sit just west of Sitka at 998 millibars. You can see a very thin strip of kind of a changeover between rain and snow. This is working itself eastward while dragging in some drier air behind it. Looks like the snow will continue in earnest for places like Hyder, as we were talking about, with 1 inch an hour snowfall rates. That's pretty impressive stuff. And again, snowfall totals that could make their way up to about 14 inches or so of snow. So a lot of this is winding down here across southeast. There is an opportunity for some light snow across south central tonight. Clouds mainly north of the Yukon Valley, but then they really thin out heading into the Brooks Range, and high pressure camped out right over Barrow. So it's going to lock in the cold in that low layer of cloud cover right up against the coast at 1,020 millibars. Pockets of snow, flurries, probably areas of fog, of course, across the Bering with a 982 millibar low here. That's working its way north and east into Bristol Bay with warmer air on the south side. Once again, places like Dutch Harbor working up toward 50 degrees this afternoon. As we head into Friday and the end of the week, low pressure here is working eastward toward Bristol Bay, 984 millibar low. This area is the strongest part of the storm here, and again, that warmer surge running into colder air, well, that's going to give us that opportunity of freezing rain. While light, it may slick things up just a little bit, especially for exposed surfaces there, so watch that at least during the hours of 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 p.m. again is when that winter weather advisory for freezing rain will be in effect for areas in the west and southwest. Low pressure in southeast moving its way into British Columbia. With that, some drier air should start to work in across central and northern parts of southeast. Maybe a good day to get out and take some pictures there. Looks for some areas of light snow still hanging around the higher terrain and some rain working across extreme southern parts of southeast. Otherwise, we're going to keep an eye on this spot right here as it heads over Kodiak Island and toward Seward, I should say, in the western parts of Prince William Sound. This may represent an opportunity for some warmer air to work into south central Alaska. So by Friday night, south central areas may be watching for some pockets of freezing drizzle. There's a better chance that most areas will see snow. But again, we're watching for that potential for warm and cold air to meet up perhaps in slightly the wrong way, at least as far as we're concerned for wintertime. High pressure across the Arctic coast and across the upper Yukon Valley going to lock in that cold. So places like Northway and Eagle remain cold, of course. With Saturday's forecast looking a little bit different. Low pressure is working its way into the northern Gulf at this point and east of Kodiak Island. Depending on how this tracks here, will determine exactly what's going on Sunday and Monday for South Central and Prince William Sound, and eventually for Southeast. This will probably mean some more snow for you, so you want to keep an eye on this as you head into Sunday and probably Monday, with a pretty good potential for onshore flow and a lot of moisture coming in with this one as well. Out across the west, you can see that surge of cold air starting to drop southward. High pressure right now sitting across the central Aleutians by the beginning of the weekend may slow down or even break up that front, but it does represent a colder surge trying to work its way off the eastern parts of Asia and Siberia. And into the west coast, you can see some remnant areas of rain and snow. With colder air dropping south, that will likely become all snow very quickly across the YK Delta. And again, we've got that representation here of rain and snow mixing in a little bit across south central and north of Kodiak Island and the Shelikof Strait. Watch for that to maybe again have some lingering areas of freezing drizzle perhaps by early Saturday morning. Most of that will turn over to snow fairly quickly. This afternoon then 30s and 40s for some parts of southeast. Now northern areas across southeast were easily in the teens and 20s, and it was all snow there. But you can see that line was pretty sharp around Petersburg and points southward. Things were trying to remain just a little bit warmer, so very wet snow there, with the exception of Hyder at 19 degrees, cold enough for some pretty good snow machine kind of weather there. Teens and 20s around Prince William Sound and southeast. Kenai only 8 this afternoon, 12 in Anchorage, and only 3 around Wasilla and Palmer. 19 degrees in Talkeetna. As you get up across the Alaska Range, it was 10 near Denali, 2 in Fairbanks, 2 below at Fort Greely. Northway and Eagle, well below 0, though Northway clearly colder at 21 below. Anaktuvuk Pass, 17 below. Arctic Village at 20 below. Anywhere from 13 below to 26 below as you get out toward the Chukchi Seacoast there. Some of the coldest temperatures on the Alaska map today. Anywhere from 5 to 10 below around Kotzebue Sound. Kivalina was showing 8 below, 12 above in Nome. Norton Sound was seeing temperatures mainly in the low to mid-teens. McGrath was at 9 above around Bristol Bay. Readings there in the low to mid-30s, with Bethel at 22 a little bit further up the coast. 30s and 40s across the Alaska Peninsula, 38 in Kodiak, 49 in Dutch Harbor, Unalaska there, so one of the warmest temperatures still across the eastern Aleutians. 30s for the Pribilofs, and temps at or just below the 40-degree mark as you head out west of Adak, 33 in Shemya. Overnight low temperatures, a clear difference here south of the Alaska Range, with readings mainly in the teens, 20s, and 30s. The Alaska Peninsula, a few spots there around Sand Point might make it into the 40s, 20s, and 30s for most of southeast. One exception would be Craig or Klawock, likely in the lower 40s tonight. Elsewhere in the interior, in the Arctic coast, anywhere from 5 below to about 33, maybe even 40 below, depending on how close you are to Arctic Village and Fort Yukon tonight. Pretty cold stuff there, with temperatures probably warming up maybe 10 degrees or so tomorrow, but not a whole lot of improvement for you. 0 in Barrow, 10 in Nome. Bethel looking at 30 degrees. Bristol Bay in the 30s and 40s. Kodiak 39. South Central 20s and 30s there. Southeast and Juneau mainly at or just below the freezing point. In the north, the southern areas likely just above freezing. Sitka about 38, and Dutch Harbor about 44 for you. As far as flying weather goes, pockets of IFR will continue tomorrow afternoon across the YK Delta and upriver there into the upper Kuskokwim and probably the lower and middle Yukon valleys. Pockets of the Cook Inlet and even western areas of Prince William Sound around Whittier, likely going IFR for most of the day. MVFR conditions across the Arctic coast, a wide area across the Gulf of Alaska, and certainly the Bering Sea as we go. Here's your pass conditions as we go through the northern areas. Expect VFR for both Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass tomorrow. Looking around the Alaska Range, we would expect Lake Clark and Merrill Pass to turn over toward IFR conditions as we go through the day. Rainy Pass likely MVFR conditions. Same goes for Windy Pass tomorrow, and transitioning toward marginal restrictions there in Isabel, and Mentasta Pass probably holding at at VFR conditions, with Tanita Pass leaning over toward MVFR conditions by the end of the day. Portage Pass, as we saw there on the western side of Prince William Sound, probably IFR, but most of the pass VFR transitioning to MVFR through the day. The western side might be relatively clear. And Chilkoot and White Pass likely VFR, with improving conditions there for parts of southeast. Freezing levels show that surface freezing line hugging the Gulf Coast all the way around, and probably somewhere between Nunivak Island and the Pribilofs as we get into your Friday morning. Otherwise, that warm and wet air is overrunning that surface freezing line. So once again, areas maybe as far north as McGrath and perhaps Galena, looking at a chance for some light freezing rain. Again, that may be fleeting in its chance, but somewhere between 9 o'clock and 9 p.m., 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. tomorrow with that winter weather advisory. So again, check your local conditions throughout the day, as any freezing rain is, well, you could say treacherous for aviation. Icing potential out in the west below 10,000 feet and above 3,000 feet is probably where that light to isolated moderate icing potential is. We had numerous reports of rime ice, I believe, today out across southeast and across the Copper River Basin and northern parts of the Gulf below 10,000 feet. There's a pretty good opportunity for some light icing potential there, and you can see that threat stretches across the Pribilofs and across the central Aleutians. Ridge of high pressure still in charge of our upper level weather pattern with a trough just to the east representing a pretty cold flow for the lower 48 if you're heading out of town, and a north and westerly flow coming across and then diving south of the Aleutians and then running into that ridge and forcing that active weather in across the south and west coast for now. At 9,000 feet, and there's our trough of low pressure across the west coast. A ridge bringing some of the active weather into southeast. Light winds across most of the interior at this level, kind of an offshore flow from Barrow and points west into the Chukchi Sea. And then at 3,000 feet, the ridge shifts in its position ever so slightly, but a pretty dominant northerly flow across the western Bering and central and western Aleutian chain. And that southwesterly onshore flow running right into the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and south central Alaska with wind speeds there between 20 and 30 knots. Below 4,000 feet, you might run into some occasional moderate chop there out of Kotzebue Sound and the northern parts of the Seward Peninsula. Below 4,000 feet across Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, all the way into the eastern parts of the Aleutians and including Kodiak Island tomorrow in advance of that next wave of low pressure. Things should be settling down for parts of southeast as we go into your Friday. That's a look at your aviation forecast, and now Indy, Alaska. We'll be back with a marine weather forecast for you here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
We have a big solar flare coming in, so we're out here on an aurora hunt. It's a CME, it's dynamite, coronal mass ejection. It's when the sun, it kicks off energy and these explosions that are larger than the Earth, explosion type things, coming off of sunspots. And if that energy is pointing straight at the Earth, it gets caught up in our magnetic field, and that energy, electrons, come down our magnetic field, collide with oxygen up there about 50 or a couple hundred miles high, and that's what generates the northern lights. My job as the photographer and the aurora hunter is to be in position, you know, location, location, location. And I like to think I'm composing. Mother Nature, it's a bit of a teamwork thing, you know, she's got to put on the show, but I have to be in the right position and of course with the right tools and the know-how. I've stopped keeping track of how much time I spend out here in terms of hours. It's more in terms of weeks or months, or at this point years now. You know, it was always in me. Even when I was a kid growing up in the lower 48, I would spend nights sleeping on our trampoline, just staring at the stars. I'm in 4th grade and I'm going, wow, look at those stars. And I'd see how many nights in a row I could sleep on the trampoline. And I think my record was 23 nights in a row. So I was doing kind of strange things for an Iowa country boy. I can remember specifically the very first time I saw the Northern Lights. It was 1989, the peak of the solar cycle, and I was going to graduate school in Laramie, Wyoming. And all of a sudden we had heard the Northern Lights were out. It's like, what are those? I'd never really seen them before. And my goodness gracious, we were on top of a mountain in the Laramie Range and they were turning blood red. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And the very first picture I took, that was 1990. Now, an old film camera, Pentax K1000 on a plastic Kmart tripod. Took 2 shots on slide film and got them back. And I thought, oh my gosh, this beautiful green thing swirling about. And from that moment, I was hooked. When I realized that you could preserve the auroras on film, I just experimented a ton. I'd had a heaping stack of slides, the no good ones. The experiments gone wrong, you know, too dark, fuzzy, out of focus, too light. I had this huge garbage can full of excess slide film, and that was just the learning curve. Well, when I go out here, it's all about getting the shot. And my wife and I, we've called it the hero shot. But the hero shot is the one where you just come home and you go, look at this. And everyone goes, wow, and you feel like a hero. It's a wonderful feeling. You know, it's good for the ego, of course. It's good for the business. But if you kind of strip that away, it's good for what's inside you, because that's really the hero moment in nature. And Mother Nature's putting on this show that is just mind-blowing. It's unbelievable. When I first resigned from my day job, that was in 1996, and decided I wanted to become a full-time aurora hunter, my goal from that moment and to this day still is to get one hero shot a year. I figured, and I'm talking the kind that somebody wants to buy from you and hang on their wall, where the auroras are extremely bright, very active, turning colors, where you can't believe your eyes. If you're going to preserve a little sample of that with a photograph, well, it's what we call the hero shot. Wow, what a feeling. I mean, you're elevated, levitating, you're lifted up. Your spirits are so high that I love that feeling. And I think I get that so much from seeing cool things in nature that I will go way out of my way to find that. And I can, the next day, well, I'll be just laying there thinking about it and thinking how lucky I was, or how fortunate. Of course, I just spent 2 weeks sitting there staring at the sky and not seeing anything, so you got to remember that luck is kind of a relative term, but I still just feel incredibly lucky to be even in a position to where I could have been there, taken a photograph of it, and just mainly experienced it. Well, that feeling could last for days.
And if you like stories like that, you can sure visit alaskapublic.org for many different views on what's going on around your part of Alaska. Today's Sea Ice Edge, well, you can see the Bering Strait has closed off. There's still some holes there north of St. Lawrence Island, but short, fast ice all the way down to Bristol Bay into the Kuskokwim Bay. Even some ice here that's filling in across northern parts of the Cook Inlet. So it's about that time of the year, I guess. If you'd like to analyze today's Sea Ice Edge, you can find some of the tools that you need to see what our sea ice program is looking at all the way around the Chukchi and the Beaufort Sea, as well as the Bering Sea now. You can do that anytime by going to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice to get the very latest information there. Now on to the marine forecast for southeast. Northerly winds coming down the Lynn Canal there. Some of those a little bit stronger than others in the northern end. 25 knots or so coming in from the north and east into Stevens Passage, and southeasterly flow across the southern inner channels. Coastal winds are going to be a little more erratic there during the day on Friday as that frontal boundary is just working its way out of the region, and low pressure system very close to Craig, working into British Columbia as we go through the day, so that should be crossing over the Dixon entrance going through Friday. As we get into Saturday, the winds kind of reverse course, go into more of a south and southeasterly flow, and winds become a little lighter there across the inner channels, anywhere from 15 to 20 knots or so, and offshore waves running into about 11 to 13 feet or so as we go through Saturday in southeast. South central tomorrow looks like more of a north and northeasterly flow coming down the Cook Inlet across Kodiak Island. That south and southeasterly wind working its way into low pressure coming into the Bering Sea already. Variable flow inside and outside of Prince William Sound coming into Resurrection Bay. 15-knot winds there with the southeast flow at 10 feet on the waves there, and about 11-foot seas coming into the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay area. The waves settle down a little bit once you get into Cook Inlet. However, freezing spray is still going to be an issue with north and northeasterly winds as you get south of Kenai. More of a light westerly flow coming into Anchorage right across the northern parts of the Cook Inlet, and northeasterlies are picking up inside Prince William Sound. Light easterly flow coming into Seward at 10 knots with a 9-foot sea, and easterlies just outside of the Barren Islands 25 knots with a 9-foot sea. Northeasterlies outside of Kodiak with a 10-knot wind and 11-foot sea on the western parts of the Gulf. Across the Alaskan Peninsula, a south and southwesterly flow coming into Bristol Bay at 25 knots with a 6-foot sea. A little bit further down the coast, a southerly flow at 30 knots with an 8-foot sea. South and southwesterlies at 30 knots with 15 to 16-foot seas on the Pacific side. Those become 11-foot seas there as we get into Saturday. Notice the easterly shift here as low pressure is working its way across. That brings in northwesterly winds on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula and into the Bering Sea side. That's 11-foot seas as we head into Saturday with southwesterlies moving into Bristol Bay. Across the Aleutians, a north and northwesterly flow coming in from Nikolsky to Atka, 35 to 40 knots. You can see the kind of erratic winds here as low pressure is working its way across the chain. A southerly flow in advance and, of course, a northerly flow on the backside there. Winds anywhere from 25 to 30 knots with 18 to 20-foot seas, and a north and northwesterly flow coming through the Aleutians as we get into Saturday. That cold northerly flow working its way out of the Bering Strait and now over the ice around places like St. Lawrence Island and St. Matthew Island, looking at that northerly flow at 35 knots. About the same there as you get down to the Pribilofs with a 14-foot sea. A little bit more of a northeasterly shift coming across the western tip of Nunivak Island. More northwesterly winds behind the front on Saturday. 8 to 10-foot seas there. 12-foot seas around the Pribilofs and a southerly flow coming into the Kuskokwim Bay with an 8-foot sea expected. On Friday, westerlies coming across the Beaufort seacoast, 15 to 20 knots, and more of a north and easterly flow coming down the Chukchi seacoast at 20 knots on Friday. By Saturday, we're looking at more of a uniform northeasterly flow. Strongest winds will shift a little bit more toward the Chukchi seacoast between 15 and 30 knots there, so probably some areas of blowing snow as well. Here's a recap of what's going on tonight. The focus for really active snow and heavy snow making will be around Hyder with snowfall totals that could reach upwards of 14 inches. Snowfall rates today we suspect are around 1 inch an hour. The shift will focus farther and farther south and east overnight tonight, but still many areas in southeast have winter storm warnings. Those will expire in the next few minutes for northern areas. Pockets of snow across south central and southwest tonight, but watch this area of low pressure work its way up through south and western Alaska tonight and again tomorrow. Winter weather advisory for freezing rain across some parts of the west. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.